So I have a personal connection to this because the gentleman who is receiving the Dalai Lama in Assam
You want to increase the
is
size of the picture first?
1 minute. I just want to
Yeah.
check his name. His name is Nripendra Ram Phukun. He was in the
Hmm.
Assam civil service and he was the official who welcomed the Dalai Lama in Tezpur in
Hmm.
1959. So
Okay.
this is a matter of pride for the Phukun family. I count his son as a very close friend. This was the
Hmm.
cover of Life magazine.
Oh, okay.
Yes, this photo is from the cover of Life magazine. The Dalai Lama being welcomed into India.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the WARC Indian History Podcast. I'm Utkarsh Mohan, coming to you from Singapore.
Namaste, Sumedha from Switzerland.
Great. And today we have a wonderful topic for you, something that is rather relevant in this day and age, but also at the same time has a very rich history. And it is, oh, I was
You
waiting
want
for
to
you to
create
reveal it.
some
Okay, I'll reveal it.
suspense? Okay, that's India, Tibet, and China.
Yes.
What is the relationship between these three? And it's a fraught relationship. Today, it's one of the most significant relationships on the planet. So, where did
Yes.
it begin and where has it reached and where is it going? And I think the person who's going to keep the baton this time is again going to be Utkarsh. Remember last time for our 25th special, he had handed me the baton for a little while, just for one episode. Handed
Got
back
used
to
to it.
him. Now I hand it back to him, and he'll ask the questions, and I hope that I will answer them to his satisfaction and to yours, everyone who's listening. And by the way,
Yes,
please keep up the good work. We are nearly reaching 18,000, so just keep up the good work. Let's rush to 20.
absolutely. Yes, and thank you for the baton. I appreciate it. Um, where to begin? And I was thinking also about how to construct this because this is such rich territory. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to just, kind of give my perspective on this entire thing. India and China historically have been significant civilizations. You could argue that till about 20 years ago, the last 100 years before that, it was kind of, they were out of the limelight. People were focused on the US and the USSR and so on and so forth. And now suddenly it's become important again. The US is very focused on China and India. One more positive relationship, one more negative relationship. There's a relationship between India and China to begin with. And then there's Tibet, the rather potentially tragic story of Tibet in the middle of all of this. So I thought what we could do is rather than start from where we are today, because that is very, very relevant, it's very, very political and very, very fraught. It would be wonderful for us to have a deeper understanding of where it began, what was the historical, uh, what is the history actually of the civilizations, how they interacted. Because today's nation states are different from what used to be in the past. So it would be very good to have a historical perspective. We both know that from an Indian's perspective, China is making territorial claims on India that India does not appreciate. I'm pretty sure China has a perspective as well. So understanding that would be good. You may not agree with it, you may completely disagree, but it's important to know why they're thinking or why they're doing what they're doing. So that's one aspect of it. And I think it's very important to recognize Tibet because I think one of the things that's been happening, I mean, for Indians, everybody knows what Tibet is, but for a lot of people outside of India, right, a lot of people don't even know that Tibet was a separate
Yes.
country. And I think one thing that stood out to me, which I wanted to mention, the number one podcaster in the world is Joe Rogan. And, I follow him now and then. So I think 2 or 3 years ago, they were having some conversation and they were talking about the US unnecessarily villainizing China. And he said, when has China ever invaded any country?
Oh my
Why are we
God.
why
Oh
are we
my
villainizing them?
God.
And I felt like shouting at the screen a little bit. But I think even for the international audience that we have, especially for folks who are not part of this part of the world, it would be important to have this episode as a evidence-based historical account of what has happened between these two civilizations where we are today, so that then you can place today's happenings and today's geopolitics in proper context.
it's you use the word tragic, and tragic is exactly what it is, because Tibet has been a country, an identity, a place of its own for for most of history. And the final proper invasion was in 1951. How can your Joe Rogans of the world not know things that happened in 1951? And such is the case for a podcast, which is the most popular podcast in the world. Says a lot about the ignorance of people who we listen to. From my point of view, Tibet is something that is not given enough importance in Indian history either. And I myself will plead guilty to that. And therefore, this has been a real occasion for me to brush up on everything and just get my perspective into place. Before I start, we must remember that the only place where Tibet still lives is in India. It's in India
Hmm.
that the Tibetan government in exile lives in Dharamshala, that its monasteries still live. And by the way, Utkarsh, these beads are from the biggest Tibetan monastery in India. That's the Tawang Monastery. And they were given to me by my sister, that is your mother, when she went there to visit to uh, Tawang Monastery. She got this for me. So I'm wearing it specially for this episode.
Where is Tawang in India?
Arunachal Pradesh.
Arunachal Pradesh. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And as we'll see, because I will show you some historical maps, it has been part of Tibet. So, like we discussed once when we were talking about Bharat as a country, countries who have hundreds of years or thousands of years of their existence have had different boundaries. It is as
Hmm.
true
Hmm.
for India, as for France, as for Germany, as for UK, and it is true for Tibet. Today, its boundary has dwindled to nothing. It's just a government in exile. But like any other country, like China, whose boundaries went in and out, like Mongolia, like India, the boundaries were like kind of moving up and down, in and out, depending on who lost which war, etc. And I'll show
Hmm.
you a few maps. I think the first thing I should do is just to give you an idea of the footprint of Tibetan civilization. I should show you a map. So can you see this?
Yes, and it looks massive.
Yes.
Sorry, first reaction.
Yes. So this is, as you can see, the Tibetan Empire at its greatest extent. This was 822. And in 823, a stele with the whole thing described and the relations between Tibet and China described, that was installed in a temple, in front of a temple in Lhasa. So, to
Hmm.
give you a little bit of the history of the place, I'm going to use this map. Let's keep it here because it will make things a little bit easier.
Okay.
A few, like I told you, Tibetan on Twitter has really been helping me, although I don't know him and he doesn't know me. But he's been giving me some excellent books, for example, the one by Warren Smith, to help me to look at the history of Tibet. So,
Hmm.
some
Hmm.
of the stuff that I've been reading, there are scholars who are lamenting that no one is doing the research necessary to tell us all about Tibet in its most ancient form. So on the left, can you see the place which is called Zhangzong near Mount Kailash? Can you see
Yes.
that, Utkarsh?
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
just going to put my
Yeah.
pointer
Yeah. I
here.
saw it. Yeah.
Okay. And just note that Mount Kailash is also there. Now, Mount Kailash is the center of the world for Hindus. And Mount
Yeah.
Kailash is also important for the Tibetans. Today it is in China, but actually it was in Tibet. And Zhangzong is the most ancient name of Tibet. That's where it all started. So
Hmm.
there are many origin stories. That is the area around which it started, and the origin stories have more to do with your philosophy and your metaphysics. So the
Hmm.
ideas are the same, that creation emerged out of the Panchbhut. You know that the
Hmm.
Panchbhut is earth, wind, sky, air, water. It's the same for Hindu thought. And they have, in the beginning there was nothing and then there was creation. So that will remind anybody who knows anything about the Rig Veda of the Nastiya Sukt, that in the beginning there was nothing. So there are these great parallels between very ancient Tibet and ancient Indian thought. And that's where the core of Tibet lies. That is Anzong. And it's also something to remember. Again, one of our past episodes, if you remember, we had said that there are genetic relationships between Mesopotamia and Tibet. So there is a
Mm-hmm.
paper on this that the Mesopotamians could have come from Tibet. But the thing is that such research is very, such papers are few and far between. So we have to really bemoan the lack of research and hope that some more happens. But I don't see Big
Mm-hmm.
Brother China approving of all this, so I don't know. Now,
I
at
was the Economist they do a podcast on China.
hmm,
I take it with a bit of grain of salt because when I see what they do in India, I see the inaccuracies. I'm sure there are biases on all sides, but
hmm,
they were talking about how the children in China, in the Tibet, which is now occupied by China, they have to go to basically they are being kind of re-educated
yes,
to take
yes,
away all the Tibetan bit and make them Chinese.
yes,
It's
yes.
quite a heartbreaking thing.
And Utkarsh, this has been going on for many years, many years.
Hmm.
And now, at least since 1950, it is being done. It was happening even before 1950, not as if it wasn't. It was happening
How was it
just
happening before 1950, before the occupation?
oh, so it was not as if it's not that simple, Utkarsh, that there was
Okay,
a
you will get
sudden
into it.
invasion.
Sorry, we
Yes,
jumped
yes,
forward. Okay, we'll
yes,
jump
yes.
forward. Okay,
We absolutely jumped forward, and we are going to I'm going to tell you how it happened. It was in
okay.
1912 that this Chinese Republic came into being. And it was they
Okay.
started doing all this from 1912. And in any case, there is a history of Sino-Tibet relations, which is a very complicated one. At some point of
Hmm.
time, Tibet was dominant. At some point of time, China was dominant. Today, China would like to tell you that they were always dominant and Tibet was always a part of China, but that's not true. You just have to see that stele in Lhasa, unless they have
Hmm.
just picked it up and thrown it away, because Lhasa is now under Chinese
Hmm.
occupation.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, the ideas of the Tibetans are also that universe came from a cosmic egg. This is the same as the Indian
Hmm.
idea. And there is a religion in Tibet other than Buddhism, which is called Bon. It is pre-Buddhist, although
Hmm.
some people say that the main deity of Bon could also be Lord Buddha. So this Bonpo also has the Bonpo. The people who follow the Bon religion are called the Bonpo.
Hmm.
It has a father and a mother figure, and it is from this father and mother figure that the six basic tribes of Tibet have actually come down. So the Sripat Sangpo Bomkri is the father, and the Chu Ikam Gyalmo is the mother. Now, there is another very interesting story about how all the Tibetans came into being. So, the story is that they are the children of a demoness, an ogress, a rock ogress, and a monkey.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
some people like to see them as symbols of Avalokiteshvar. He was a bodhisattva, one of the
Hmm. Hmm.
avatars of Buddha. So he was a bodhisattva. So the monkey is Avalokiteshvar, and the demon ogress, the rock ogress, is a form of goddess Tara. So, this
Okay.
is taken both positively and negatively later in the history of Tibet. They themselves have tried to pin down this demoness who controls Tibet, and some of the temples which were made in Tibet were to try and control and pin down this demoness. I will come to that. So
That
this
I know
is
this is a tangential question, but
hmm,
Tibetan Tara, is that
hmm,
linked to India has I mean, you
yes,
know more than
yes,
me. I'm just
of
saying my
course, of
very
course,
limited
of
knowledge.
course, of course, of
Mahavidya's
course.
Tara,
Hmm.
right?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes, of course, of
Okay.
course. So the
Okay.
Tibetan pantheon of gods and goddesses, you find absolutely detailed parallels with the Indian
Okay.
ones. Absolutely
Okay.
detailed ones. So there's absolutely no doubt about
So
that.
the Tibetans, sorry, I'm just establishing the civilizational origin. So this
Links, yes.
links.
Hmm.
So we talk about the Vedic religion, right? Or we talk about ancient Vedic religion. So is what was happening in Tibet? Is it similar? Is it an offshoot? Is it different? Is it linked?
Offshoot, offshoot,
Okay, it's an
offshoot.
offshoot.
Yeah. So it's like a tree. with the same roots. So one of them is
Okay.
growing this way, one of them is growing this way. So if you look at, say, Shaivites or Vaishnavites, and you look
Yeah.
at Buddhists and you look at the Tibetans, they're all different branches
Yeah.
of the same tree.
Okay. Got it.
So,
Okay.
Utkarsh, there's another very, very interesting story about where did the Tibetans come from? And guess
Okay.
what? It's the Mahabharata. So they are supposed to be the offspring of the 99th Kaurav. You know,
The
the Lord one
99.
had, yes,
One of them only.
only
Okay.
one, yes. Because when the Kauravs lost the war, then
Hmm.
this one ran away into the
Hmm.
Himalaya. And Tibet is in the Himalayas or beyond the
Yeah.
Himalayas. So he and his band of people, they formed the core from which the progeny of which is they are today known as Tibetans. Now, this is
Okay.
a very sweet little story, but there are few loopholes in this because the name given is Rupati. And in the list of names of the 100 Kaurav brothers, there is not any Rupati.
Okay.
However, given that we are looking at translations and retranslations and mistranslations and transliterations, it would be really good to see all the originals.
Okay.
Where did this word Rupati come from? So this is
Hmm.
yet another story. So you see, this is how the basis of this Tibetan civilization, the core, which is the Zhangzhou civilization, this is how it all began. So
Okay.
one of the first king, the legendary first king was called Nyatri Sangpo, and the capital was called Kunlun. And why is Kunlun important? Because what does it mean? It means a land of Garud. And we know Garud very well. He is the Vahan
Hmm.
of Lord Vishnu.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am just trying to tell you all the very basic links between India and Tibet, which started probably thousands of years ago. Because the exact date of the Zhangzhou civilization, you can say it's 500 BCE, but there are others who say that certain things, certain remains have been found which are not being looked at properly. So it could be go much beyond 500 BC to 2000 BC. We don't know. So all the
Hmm.
links and the whole idea of the greater Indic sphere is what I am trying to posit over here. So you've got it, the Bon religion, the Bonpo people, the Zhangzhung core, and the first king Nyakri Sangpo, and all the Indic links. Now, after this, the significant one is now look at the map again. The map is right here. So
Yeah.
look at can you see Lhasa, and below that, can you see Yarlung?
Yes.
Okay. So take a look at this Yarlung.
Okay.
So now that we've established where was Zhangzhung and where was Yarlung, because these are the two big ancient significant dynasties of Tibet. Yarlung was very, very, very significant. The dates given to the Yarlung dynasty are very, very different. Some say they started at the first century after the Common Era. Some say of the Common Era, 127 CE. But definitely around the 6th century, there were the three who are called the Dharma Kings, or in Tibetan, they are called the Chogyals. So these three Chogyals established and took Tibet to its heights. They unified Tibet, brought it all together, and established all the things that became the hallmarks of Tibet. So the names of these three kings were Songtsen Gampo. The second one was his son, and the third one was his grandson, Ralpachan. So Songtsen Gampo, Trisong Detsen, and Ralpachan. Remember these three names.
Hmm.
Songtsen Gampo, between 618 and 650 CE, is the man who basically established Tibet as it is known today. So, what did he do? He unified Tibet, he brought Buddhism formally into Tibet, he brought the Tibetan script. So, he sent someone to India and then he adapted the Brahmi script, of which we have spoken a lot in this podcast in earlier episodes. So that Brahmi script was adapted to Tibetan, and then that became the Tibetan script. And I'm going to, at the end of this, when you talk about when we can talk about the India-Tibet links, we'll talk about Dunhuang caves, and we'll talk about the cache of treasure trove of papers found over there, and we'll see how all these things are borne out by the Dunhuang trove. So,
Okay.
Songtsen Gampo established the capital at Lhasa. I just showed you where Lhasa was. Set down
Hmm.
the foundations of the Potala Palace. The Potala Palace is the palace of the Dalai Lama. And the Potala Palace was actually burnt down by the Chinese. He also brought in the Buddhist monk called Rinpoche or Padmasambhav. This Padmasambhav was the one who established Buddhism in Tibet. There was also a monk before him. He was called Shankar Rakshit. But the main person who has done all this is Padmasambhav. He is also the one who helped in building some of the temples to pin down that demoness, the earth demoness. So, he did a lot of things. He fought with people. He helped the Nepal king to re-establish himself. The Narendra Dev, the Nepal king came to him for help, so he gave him help. He fought with the Zhangzongs, he fought with the Chinese, and he also did a lot of marriage alliances. So he married a Nepali princess called Brikuti and a Chinese princess called Wenchen. They are both very important because they bought images of the Buddha from their own maternal homes, and the most significant important temples of Tibet were built to house these images, the Nepalese image and the Chinese image. And then he also had a Zhangzong wife, he had a Tangut wife. These are all Chinese, Tibetan, important, strong areas. So basically, he unified Tibet and made it very strong with a lot of alliances. He put the cultural basis in place with inputs from India. And this is happening in the 7th century. Now, his son and his grandson, who reigned in 753, grandson in 815, they were also equally good. In fact, uh, Ralpa was the one who gave the Chinese their worst defeat. They fought, and in 1822, there was a treaty between Ralpa and Emperor Muzong of the Tang dynasty, which defined the border between Tibet and China. China also ratified the Gansu occupation of Tibet. If you remember that map I showed you, Gansu is to the northeast part of Tibet. So China had to agree that that part, Gansu, belonged to Tibet and not to China. Then in 823, the Tang Tibet Treaty inscription stele was placed in front of the Jokhang temple in Lhasa. So there you have, and just remember this date, 823, and remember this treaty, because whenever the Tibetans have entered into any kind of negotiations with China and with the help of other powers such as Britain and Russia, they have referred to this as the starting point and the point from which they want to start the negotiations of Tibet being a country separate from China, because this was
Hmm.
a treaty which recognized Tibet and China, and actually Tibet had the upper hand over here because China had to
Hmm.
cede some of its territory. So this
Hmm.
is kind of seen as the high point of Tibet. And I just showed you the map. And
Yeah.
in this stele was placed in Lhasa. So this brings us up to about 800. So you do get the point, Utkarsh, that there was a lot of fighting with countries and with kingdoms around, and also a lot of cultural imports from India. Today, when
Hmm.
India tries to say that it's going to become a Vishwa Guru, people don't take it very seriously at the moment, at least. But those were the
Hmm.
days when, for wisdom and for all kinds of enlightenment and knowledge, the world used to come to India. So this Tibetan king also came to India, and many, many monks from Nalanda, from Takshashila, from Vikramshila, and their names are still known, their traditions are still followed. In fact, we have a Tibetan monastery near Geneva, which is the follower of a monk who had come to Tibet from Vikramshila in the 15th
Okay.
century. So all this still lives, but it's kind of, under the radar. But
Hmm.
after this 822, there was a period of great turbulence for 400 years. Buddhism, well, it was imported, and well, it was a good thing for them because it was culturally enriching them. It was
Hmm.
enrichment of their religious sphere also, but it also
Hmm.
led to the growth of a number of Buddhist sects and monasteries, which were very powerful in themselves, and then they started fighting with each other. So it led to a lot of small states.
Why were
Buddhism
the
flourished.
Buddhist sects? Well, I was gonna. It's a very, very naive question to ask, given what is happening in modern day Myanmar. But how are they reconciling the fighting with each other with Buddhism?
Don't ask me. I think you'll have to ask the Karmapa and the Dalai Lama and all of them, because they were all fighters. So this it's a hollow kind of formulation to say that no Buddhists ever fought. They fought like crazy. And I mean, they went to war like anybody else. So, even in Hindu thinking, there is the
Hmm.
importance of ahimsa, but you have to defend yourself. Here, of course, it was not
Okay.
just defending yourself, they
It's
were
attacking
jostling.
as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and
Correct.
jostling for position and power. So the next 400 years were not good because small
Hmm.
states fighting, etc., etc. In between, another very significant monk, his name was
Hmm.
Atisha Dipankar. He came in the 10th century and established the Kadamba order. This is a very important order. Then after that, the Sakyapa and the Kagyutpa orders were also established. Please remember the names, or at least the idea that these orders were there, because they played a role in the future religious and political history of Tibet. So I
Hmm.
want to stop for a moment, Utkarsh, and look at the date. This was the 10th century. What was happening in India in the 10th century? In the 10th century, I think the way in which knowledge was flourishing in India has perhaps not been replicated again. We are talking about people who are going to Tibet, to China, and you remember that we also spoke of Japan, Korea, all the
Hmm. Hmm.
Southeast Asian countries being influenced by Indian thought and Indian people, and Indian
Hmm.
kingdoms and dynasties moving there. We have promised our listeners that we are going to do a special series on this, and that is
Hmm.
there. I mean,
Hmm.
we're working on it. Maybe we'll go there and do it for you. So we're going to do it in a very good way.
Yeah, I
So
need to. I
just
haven't been to Japan for a while. Good excuse.
or other countries in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
So I just want you to stop and think about the Indic influence. What was happening in Kashmir? In Kashmir, this was the flowering of the kind of science and technology and wisdom which has not happened again, like I told you. So this was the time of Abhinav Gupta. What was happening in the south? This was the time of Rajaraja Chola, of Rajendra Chola. You've of course heard of the Cholas and what they were doing. And this is also the time when India is exporting its people. We are talking about Buddhists right now, but all kinds of artisans, craftspeople, monks, religious people, scientists, everyone was being exported. So just think of the 10th century as a kind of beautiful flowering of Indian wisdom and soft power. Anyway, to return to our story, now come the Mongols. And I remember when we were discussing this, you had said that you were also interested in the Mongol aspect and angle, because isn't it something the Chinese use to justify taking over
Exactly.
Tibet?
So which is the whole bit, right? So the the Mongolians are separate from the Chinese.
Yes,
At the same time, there was a period of time where the Chinese emperors were the Mongolian emperors,
yes.
right, so to speak.
Yeah, because
So
they
then there is
overran
the
China. They overran
because they
China.
overran, they conquered China, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And
So
so
it's a yeah. So that's kind of my
it's a
interest. Yeah,
complicated story. Yeah, it's a
correct.
complicated
Maybe you
story.
can explain
And
it better. Yeah.
yeah, so okay, you've heard of, and everyone has heard of Genghis Khan.
Yes.
Who hasn't? He's one of the persons who said to have left the most number of descendants in the world, apparently. Genetically, many
Hmm.
of us have his genes. And he has perhaps the biggest empire, land empire ever. I'll just show you. Before I start talking of the Mongols, let me
Yeah.
show you the Mongolian Empire. And I'll show it to you in an interesting way because there's this
He
Wikipedia page
never. He
which
never. He interestingly, I know he never. He never invaded India, right? if I'm not mistaken.
No, you're not mistaken.
Okay. Maybe we'll talk about that. Maybe, I don't know, at some point. I'm very curious about that entire piece.
Take a look at this. Can you see how it's becoming bigger? The Mongolian Empire. Yeah.
Yes.
See?
Oh, okay. What happened at the end?
See. Look at this.
Yes.
But remember, even at its greatest extent, it did not include India. So
Hmm.
this is where we are at. And maybe I'll show you this one. Can you see a different map now?
Yes.
Mongolia, a fixed map, not a changing map.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So this was Mongolia, and this was Genghis Khan. So in at the end of his life, and Genghis Khan attacked a place which is called Tangut, and this Tangut is in China. Now he died while fighting with Tangut, so obviously
Hmm.
all of the Mongolian power went to this, and they totally destroyed Tangut. Now, when they destroyed Tangut, then people from there went up and ran and to save themselves and went to Tibet. So what
Okay.
happened after that? Genghis Khan died, so his son was called Godan Khan. Godan
Hmm.
Khan sent an expedition to Tibet. He obviously wanted to overrun Tibet, but the Mongolians had this habit that when they wanted to overrun some place, they used to send a expedition first and ask them to just surrender, so
Yes.
that no fighting would be necessary. So they sent an expedition. Now, over there, of the different monasteries and the different monks, there was one who was called the Sakya Pandit. So remember, he would be from the Sakyapa order. He was the head of the Sakyapa order and called Sakya Pandit. Now, this Sakya Pandit negotiated with the Mongols. During this time, what happened was that Godan Khan died. After him came another very famous man, Kublai Khan.
Kublai Khan. Yes.
Yes. So Kublai Khan negotiated with someone who was called Fagspa. Now he was a Buddhist, and he converted Kublai Khan into being Buddhist. So
Oh.
this started, I think maybe I should now stop sharing this. You've seen the whole extent of the
Hmm.
Mongolian Empire. I want to point out, just look at the southwest corner. Here's China,
Yeah.
and look at Tibet. Okay. So all
Yeah.
of it is in Mongolia.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So China was overrun and conquered by Mongolia. Tibet was overrun and conquered by Mongolia. The Mongolian Khans, Kublai Khan, Godan Khan, etc., established certain systems for Tibet and for China, which were different. And
Hmm.
in
Hmm. Hmm.
fact, in that, they gave Tibet the upper hand over China because, he had this hold over Kublai Khan because he was a Buddhist, and he
Hmm. Hmm.
became his kind of guru. If I put it in Indian terms, he became his guru.
Hmm. Hmm.
So when China was conquered by Kublai Khan, then China was given the Yuan dynasty by the Mongolians. So the Mongolians set up the Yuan dynasty.
Hmm. Hmm.
And in Tibet, they set up something which is very interesting, which is called Cho-Yon. Cho is religious authority and Yon is secular authority. So the religious authority remained with the Tibetans, that is Cho, and the secular patron were the Mongolians. So, they did not interfere too much. Tibet ran in a way. There were certain administrative changes, but this Cho-Yon system, where the Tibetan religious authority had a huge say in everything, that
Hmm.
continued. Whereas in China, they just set up an emperor, the Yuan Empire, and guess who was made the guru of this Yuan emperor? Fagspa, the Tibetan
Okay.
Fagspa. So you see that in saying that we were the kind of conquerors of Tibet also because we were part of the same empire really doesn't work.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because the Mongolians had a separate relationship with Tibet, separate relationship with China, and if at all, they made Pagspa the preceptor of the Yuan emperor. So after this, this went on for about a century or so. Let me stop sharing this. Then we come to the Ming dynasty, which was in the 14th century. The Mongols had withdrawn from China by then, but they were still a threat. So the Chinese had to
Hmm.
be careful of the Tibetans and the Mongolians, both. So, Utkarsh, what this tells us, that we have to look at Asian dynamics to understand where all these countries are at. Today, Mongolia is nothing. Nobody cares about Mongolia. It's not significant in world affairs. But at one point of time, it was Mongolia which was calling the shots. And it was
Hmm.
Mongolia which was moving everyone around. All the pawns on the chessboard were being moved by the Mongolians. So during the Ming dynasty, the Karmapa of Tibet was the religious authority. So the Mings pretended that they had some power over Tibet, but they actually didn't. They pretended that they had taken that power from Mongols and they were controlling the Tibetans, but they actually weren't. And honestly, the Mings were not so interested in Tibet. The Mings were a native dynasty of China. They did not need any kind of
Hmm.
ratification or legitimation from anyone. Remember, the
Hmm.
Mongols needed some ratification and legitimation, which they got from the Tibetan religious authority.
Okay.
Fagspa. But the Mings did not, and so they were kind of, not very interested. Then when we, I'm jumping centuries because otherwise it's really, really detailed. And if
Yeah.
anyone
Correct.
wants
We need
to,
to.
yeah, if
Yeah.
you want to read the book, then you read Warren Smith's book, which is a very good one. So then in 1642, significant thing happened. The most important and glorious Dalai Lama of all, the fifth Dalai Lama. The system of Dalai Lamas was established, and there was the first Dalai Lama, second, third, fourth. The fifth Dalai Lama was in 1642. The Mongols gave him full religious as well as temporal control over Tibet. So what happened? After 1822, Tibet was unified again in 1642 and became a separate country. Again, I say this to rebut Chinese claims that Tibet was never a separate country.
Hmm.
This is in 1642. Then you had the Manchus of the 17th century. Utkarsh, it's interesting to note that the name of the Manchus itself comes from the Buddhist bodhisattva, the Indian Buddhist bodhisattva called Manjushri. In fact, the Chinese owe so much culturally to the Indians, which they don't want to admit today. And we will do a
Hmm.
special session on this, but I will say more about this a little later.
Yeah.
Then in 1653, the Dalai Lama and the Manchu meet. But you know what happened by this time? The Qing dynasty had come into play and it had become very important and powerful. So then it made Tibet its protectorate. Now we are into colonial times. What happened now
Hmm.
is that Britain enters into this whole thing. And what is Britain's
Enters the chat.
preoccupation? Yes, it enters the chat and it starts playing the great game. What
Of
is its
course.
great game? Its great game is with Russia. So it
Yes.
has its own, kind of just an irrational fear or phobia of Russia. So it
It's
thinks
funny
that,
how literature makes this great game sound like this romantic period. It's really
yeah,
very, very devious and very terrible.
it's very devious and terrible, Utkarsh, and it has had terrible consequences for so many people
Consequences
and
even today.
nations.
Yeah.
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 And look
Correct.
at Afghanistan.
Yeah.
The destruction of Afghanistan that was started when the British Afghan wars, the first and the second British Afghan war, it
Yeah.
was because of the Great Game. Who did it help? It didn't help anything. It gave the Brits a bloody
Just on
nose.
that, a very interesting point. Sorry, it's a little bit of a tangent. So Sherlock Holmes, of course, John
Yes.
Watson is injured in
Yes.
Afghanistan.
Yes.
But the very
Yes.
interesting thing is they made a TV, they made many TV shows of Sherlock, but the recently the most famous one was made in the 2010s with Benedict Cumberbatch. And even in that,
Yes.
the John
Yes.
Watson was injured in Afghanistan because there
Yes.
was something happening in Afghanistan
Yes. Imagine.
130 years later. That's
Just
crazy, right?
imagine. It's crazy, and it struck me also that nobody has learned from all these things, all these great games that they've lost, and all the bloody noses that they've got. They haven't learned from it. And actually, look at the Americans, Karsh. If they had not tried to play this great game in Afghanistan, they wouldn't have had to bear 9/11. It's a
Mhm.
it's
Yeah,
a it's a
it's a
kind of
consequence
offshoot
in a
of
way
that.
of
It's a
the
consequence of that,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And it's a
yeah.
consequence of Charlie's War and all the people who they armed in Afghanistan. So anyway, the
Mhm.
great game, Afghanistan is one example, and Tibet is another example. So because the Brits got very excited that Tibet is going to tie up with Russia and then Russia is going to attack us, via our Indian border. So what did
Hmm.
they do? They in 1885, since Tibet was so-called Chinese protectorate, they took permits from China to visit Tibet. But when they went there,
Hmm.
the Tibetans refused to honor it and told them to get out. They didn't want them here. So you also see how much power the Chinese actually had. They had no power.
Hmm.
At this time, they were
Hmm.
in a very, very
At this
poor
time,
shape.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So in 1904, because they could not control their mania or their phobia anymore, they sent that very infamous military expedition of Young Husband in 1904. So, the Tibetans had no weapons, and
Hmm.
Young Husband's militia was fully armed, and they just shot dead the Tibetan soldiers. Out of 1,500 Tibetan soldiers, they massacred 700, and only 12 people died from their side. So this is a really black chapter in colonial history. Of so many black chapters, this is one of the blackest. They basically shot down unarmed men. And
Hmm.
Utkarsh, they didn't gain anything from it because, it was a made up thing. Russia was not coming to Tibet to fight with Britain. It was just a totally made
Hmm.
up thing. So
Hmm.
anyway,
Hmm. Hmm.
after this, they came back, and Young Husband said, yes, yes, I found Russian presence over there, made up lots of stories. You remember the secret weapons that were found when they wanted to fight with Saddam Hussein?
Yeah, WMDs.
Yeah, the WMDs. So this is a WMD situation of the 19th century.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So you see how things repeat themselves, Utkarsh.
Yeah.
Patterns are absolutely the same. But anyway,
But I
now
guess
what
politicians are too busy getting elected to read too much history. Most of them. Some do.
No, and other than that, even if they read history, I think they are impelled by things like selfishness or something like,
Hmm. Hmm.
arrogance. The Chinese today are very much impelled by arrogance. And they have been
Hmm.
impelled by arrogance across a lot of history. There's so many anecdotes of that about the how the Tibetans played them and the Mongols played them because of their arrogance. So all
But
these
I,
things are
one
also
thing that's
there.
important though is, I mean, Tibet was not conquered for whatever hundreds of years. What happened? Why
Yeah,
did it
okay.
finally break? Maybe you're getting into
Yeah.
the timeline now, so maybe that would be
Yes.
a way to
Yes.
good way to
Now,
frame it to
yes.
understand.
Now I'm getting into that timeline about how it was actually finally swallowed. Right now, remember, it has an existence of its own. It is a protectorate, and Tibet goes on petitioning the Brits because the Brits were
Hmm.
the big power of the time to help them to escape from the clutches of China. But the Brits are shilly-shallying because they want to keep
Hmm.
some relationship with China. They're shilly-shallying. In 1912, the last Qing emperor abdicates and comes into force the Chinese Republic.
Hmm.
Now,
Hmm. Hmm.
Yuan Shikai became the first president. What was the
Yes.
idea of this Chinese Republic? The idea of five fingers: the Chinese, the Manchu, the Mongol, the Tibet, and the Tatar. These were the five fingers of the Chinese. The Chinese is the Han, and the Tatar are the Uyghur, Kazakh, and Kyrgyz. All
Right.
these five fingers are the Chinese.
Hmm.
Now they wanted the Mongolians and the Tibetans to jump into the arms of the Chinese Republic. The Chinese Republic inherited Qing ideas, and those Qing ideas thought of in their own kingdom, they thought of the Tibetans as part of their country. So that was the kind of thing that was pushed into the heads of the Chinese, that the Tibetans are part of your country.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
are in a
Hmm.
very bad situation because the Dalai Lamas are a very feudal and retrograde type of ruler, and they are
Hmm.
living in a feudal cesspit. They have to be liberated and they have to join the Chinese Republic and become as progressive and as developed as us. This was the
Hmm.
idea. But in 1911, one of these fingers, the Mongols, they declared independence. And then in 1913, Tibet and Mongolia signed a mutual recognition of independence pact. Now, what happened that helped Mongolia is that Russia forced China's hand, forced it to
Hmm.
recognize Mongolia's independence. So Mongolia kind of escaped. But
Okay.
Russia was not interested in helping Tibet. Now, what were the Brits doing? So they were having these kind of conventions with Tibet, China, and Britain. Because China
Hmm.
had some kind of hold, some soldiers, a few things, but it could not fully control Tibet. And the British did not know much about Tibet at all. Young Husband's expedition was the only one. By the way, to find out what's really happening in Tibet, they sent an Indian secretly as a spy. And one day we will do the story of that Indian spy in Tibet also, to find out what was
Okay.
happening there and what was the situation. So the Simla Convention was started in 1912 between China, Tibet, and British India. Now comes in that other thing that you have been very interested in, that is the McMahon Line. That McMahon Line is today a live and burning coal. Nobody agrees with it, least of all China. So what was the idea? To make everyone sit together and to have a treaty between these three powers, because they all shared a border. I'll just show you a little map before in 2 minutes.
Okay.
So what was the misconception of the British? The misconception was they actually thought that the Chinese have full control over Tibet. Then there was a delegation from Tibet that actually came in and told them that no, we have our own ideas, we have our own independence. They emphasized that 822 declaration to say that we've been a country much before that. And we had this kind of thing absolutely established, signed by a Chinese emperor. So how can you say that we were never a country and we were always part of China? So basically, nobody agreed with anybody else. But the Brits, being the Brits, they played on two words, suzerainty and sovereignty. So they said, we can give China suzerainty, we will not give it sovereignty. But China wanted sovereignty. And Tibet didn't want to give either suzerainty or sovereignty, neither. So all this was happening, and now I will show you the McMahon Line and tell you what happened. Yeah. Can you see this? The McMahon Line?
Yeah.
So start with this red stuff here. McMahon Line disputed border. Can you see that red thing?
Yes.
On the right. So there you see, where is it? It is just above Arunachal Pradesh, but China wants to claim this part also, all of Arunachal Pradesh.
On the basis of?
Because it was always ours, because it never accepted the McMahon Line. Okay, first I'll tell you about that.
What was the historical basis before that line?
The historical basis was that it was Tibet, and Tibet was part of China. So this is southern
I got
Tibet.
it.
This is southern Tibet for China. This is southern Tibet.
So by this time, that part of Tibet had become India. What was it by this time?
By this time, it was part of British India.
Okay.
But you see, I showed you the Tibetan Empire. Let me show it to you once more. I will show the Tibetan Empire once more. Look at the Tibetan Empire. Can you see it's coming up till Assam?
Yes.
So it will be somewhere here, Arunachal Pradesh, somewhere here. Can you see where my... So since the Tibetan Empire had extended up till here, up till Assam, and you remember in 1962, the Chinese had come up to Assam. And Nehru had famously said, okay, let us leave Assam to its plight, because not even a blade of grass grows over there. So we don't need it. So these are the claims of China on the basis of the Tibetan Empire. So it says when we took over Tibet, then we took over all its territories. So therefore, this belongs to us. This is southern Tibet.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make a kind of, historical joke about this. This is the Kushan Empire. Okay. So in this case, what do you see? The Kushan Empire was run from here, from Mathura and Takshila. Okay. And it has parts of Tibet and parts of China. So then should we start saying that China belongs to us?
So Kushan Empire is also who gave us the kurta pajama, right? According to you. Or the sherwani.
Stitched cloth.
Stitched cloth.
Kurta pajama, I will not say, stitched cloth. The idea of stitching.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll go back to the McMahon Line. Where is the McMahon Line? Yes. This is a bit of a... Yeah, because, it covers up that tab and I'm not able to reach it. Okay, got it. So the Simla Convention started in 1912. There were discussions between Tibetan Chinese and Brits. The Chinese were very, very uncooperative and they did not want to agree to anything. because they were not
Hmm.
given sovereignty. However, in 1914, a treaty was drafted. It was
Hmm.
signed by McMahon, who was
Yeah.
the British commissioner, and from the side of Tibet, it was signed by Longchen Shatra in 1914. However, the Chinese did not sign it because they said we don't accept it. But the Brits, being very, very powerful, they just said that this is it now. This is the McMahon Line, and this is going to be the border between India and Tibet.
Hmm.
And you see what are the problems of India and Tibet. This is Arunachal Pradesh. China today keeps calling it Southern Tibet, and it keeps renaming all the areas according to Chinese names. At last count, it
Hmm.
has renamed at least about 30. Then can you see Tawang?
Hmm.
That is another
Yes.
very big place. And then this little border between Bhutan and India, over here, China attacked Bhutan last year or year before last. And
Hmm.
India had to come to the rescue of Bhutan. So this
Hmm.
is a hot button area. Now here is a
Yeah.
very, very sad area because this red part, this has been ceded by Pakistan to China. And this is something that we claim, but we don't have. This is the
Hmm.
area where India, China keep clashing here, keep clashing
Hmm.
over here, keep clashing over here. So this is the infamous or famous McMahon Line. So India says that this is the border that was agreed between British India and China, and or rather
Hmm.
British India and Tibet. Because remember, Tibet at that time existed as its own entity, whether it was a
Hmm.
protectorate, whether it was TAR as it is now known, or whether it was just
Hmm.
one principality of China,
Hmm.
but it existed.
Hmm.
It
Yeah.
existed and it signed an agreement with British India. And it
Hmm.
was, India was the inheritor of all the political treaties, etc., that were signed by British India. So this
Hmm.
is something that is happening in 1914. Then after that, the Chinese Republic became more and more nationalistic and more aggressive.
Hmm.
In 1950, they, all this while, what they were doing is discussing things with China, with the Dalai Lama, and the 13th Dalai Lama was the one who they were discussing things with, because at the time, the 14th Dalai Lama was very small. But
Hmm.
then the discussions between China and Tibet did not stop China from trying to take over as much of China as it could, and also trying to
Tibet. Yeah.
establish Tibet as it could, and
Hmm.
also establishing its administration and its power. But in 1950, its patience gave out and it launched a full-scale invasion. So this is the time when it actually launched a full-scale invasion. Tibet did not have the wherewithal to withstand it. It went to the United Nations in 1950 March and asked all nations for help, especially India. India refused to help.
Why?
Why did India refuse to help? Because Nehru thought that it is more important to maintain friendship with China.
Wow.
Yeah, it was far more important to maintain friendship with. And if I can see that, I had taken it out, what the UN representative, Indian UN representative at the time said. It's there in Warren Smith's book.
Hmm.
Let me see if I can find it, because it's really sad.
Hmm.
So India was reluctant to allow Tibet to influence larger issues, one of which was India's ambition to play a role in a mediator as a mediator in Cold War conflict. So it wanted to play a role in Korea, so far
Hmm.
away, but it did not want to play a role in Tibet. And India's thought that it had a very special relationship with China because India was the one which had sponsored the membership of China to the UN. So India thought that it was, it was very, very smart and it was being friendly with China and that would help. And friendly relations with China and mediation in international relations, these were the two things Nehru really wanted. So he dumped Tibet. And they hoped that, he won't be too bad, China won't be too bad to Tibet and we'll leave some autonomy. And so, we don't want to do anything. So the Indian delegate completely refused to do anything. How did he explain? And this is what I'm quoting. The Peking government had declared that it had not abandoned its intention to settle those difficulties by peaceful means. So after the fall of Chamdo, which is 480 kilometers from Lhasa, it had said we will not advance and we will be peaceful. I won't read the whole thing, but you see what India did was pretend that no, it's all going to be okay. It's okay. We have other things to think about. It's okay. We can let go of this. Now that obviously played to the advantage of China. So then China then got full control over military control over Tibet. But in 1951, the Dalai Lama had not been in China at the time, but in 1951, he was kind of persuaded or coerced to return. And he stayed in that situation till 1959. And in what else happened in between? Something very important happened. That was the Panchsheel Agreement. The Panchsheel Agreement was between India and China. The Tibet issue was festering, and in between, India wanted to do this Panchsheel Agreement. So let me tell you what India lost by doing the Panchsheel Agreement. So this Panchsheel Agreement was, 5 elements of peaceful coexistence, and it was India recognized China's sovereignty over Tibet. Therefore, it gave away its negotiating cards very easily. It got nothing, absolutely nothing in return. What else did it give up? So it gave up the fact that it had a consulate general in Lhasa, it had trade agency in Yatung, Gyantse, and Gartok. It had military escorts for all these. It ran postal, telegraph, telephone, and hospital services because British India had done it. So just think of the amount of push we had in China. And Utkarsh, I will show you till where this went. I've just done this myself. This is Gyantse, this is Lhasa. We had a consulate in Lhasa, so that means our people and a military escort here. We had our people at Yadong. We also had our people here at what they now call Katuzen. So all this was there for India right inside Chinese territory, along with military escorts and lots of many big trade delegations. So China said originally that we'll let you keep the trade delegations, but very soon they broke them up, destroyed them. And now India, of course, has no presence in Tibet, zero presence in Tibet. So you see, this is all that Nehru gave up in his either idealism, stupidity, or self-aggrandizement that I shall be a great peace negotiator.
Is this the biggest mistake made in modern India?
Or is the biggest mistake so many other big mistakes? What about not pushing them out of Kashmir, the Pakistani army?
Oh yeah, there's so many. Yeah,
There's so many.
Okay.
There's so many. So, but after this, just in short, the Chinese forced the Tibetans through military coercion to sign something which is called the 17-point agreement, in which the Tibetans themselves agree that we are part of China. And they forced them to sign it obviously through military means because they had full military control of Tibet. But in 1959, they tried to kill the Dalai Lama. First, they said, come and see a special theater performance in China, but come without your bodyguards. So obviously everyone got very, very suspicious. Why should we come without bodyguards? Then the people themselves, they surrounded that theater and they surrounded Potala Palace. Then they started blowing up a few places around where the Dalai Lama was supposed to be. So it is said that the Dalai Lama consulted his oracle, and the oracle showed him that he should leave Tibet, and it actually showed him a secret path through which to reach Arunachal Pradesh border. So he walked where the Chinese were looking for him all over using aeroplanes, using land means. So he, in disguise, he and a few of his people walked up till Arunachal Pradesh. Then over there, from there, the Indian government did provide some help. And then when they came to Assam, then they were brought in with all military honor. Shall I show you that famous picture? So I have a personal connection to this because the gentleman who is receiving the Dalai Lama in Assam.
You want to increase the size of the picture?
1 minute, I will. I just want to check his name. His name is Nripendra Ram Phukun. He was in the
Hmm.
Assam civil service, and he was the official who welcomed the Dalai Lama in Tezpur in
Hmm.
1959. So
Okay.
this is a matter of pride for the Phukun family. I count his son as a very close friend. This was the
Hmm.
cover of Life magazine.
Oh, okay.
Yes, this photo is from the cover of Life magazine. The Dalai Lama being welcomed into India. So I believe, well, India redeemed itself a little bit by allowing the Dalai Lama to make a government in
Hmm.
exile. But you see,
Hmm.
Utkarsh, the problem festers. And
Yeah.
we actually don't have a India-China problem. We have an India-Tibet border. So if it had been an India-Tibet border, it would have been much easier to
Hmm.
come to some conclusion. You see, China is now this behemoth which imagines itself as the greatest power on earth. It's going to be very
Hmm.
difficult to negotiate with it.
Yeah.
And the problems of the McMahon line will remain. And that area is very rocky. There are mountains, there are lakes, there are cliffs. So it's not as if it's easy to either negotiate or map. The mapping is
Hmm.
also extremely difficult. And there are increasingly confrontations between India and China. So India and China have signed an agreement that, nobody will shoot at the border.
Hmm. Hmm.
But then when in 2021, that whole episode happened at the China border, after that, all bets are off.
Yeah.
So China is building infrastructure, India is building infrastructure, China is poking
Hmm.
India's eye, India is poking China's eye. It's not a happy
Hmm.
situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for Tibet, it's only the word that you used, it's tragic. Now we have this Resolve Tibet Act, which has been passed in, I think, the House in the US, or is it the Senate? I don't know. But I don't know whether it's going to have any real impact.
Hmm.
And now the idea of China is to just remove Tibet from the Committee of Nations. I can also share a personal anecdote. So
Hmm.
a couple of years ago, I had gone to present a talk on Indian Ramayana miniatures, how they are painted, etc., at a
Hmm.
gathering of ambassadors' wives in Geneva. So you
Okay.
know that I've published a book, the Jagat Ramayana with the miniature. So I
Correct.
had gone
Correct.
to. So the Chinese ambassador's wife was present in that
Hmm.
gathering. And I
Hmm.
was talking about all the different Ramayans and the countries that they have gone to. So I showed a
Yeah.
list. So there
Yeah.
is also a Tibetan Ramayana and a Chinese
Hmm.
Ramayana. So in
Hmm.
that list was the Chinese Ramayana and the Tibetan Ramayana.
Hmm.
So after the talk ended, the Indian ambassador's wife called me and said that the Chinese ambassador's wife is very upset because you have
Hmm.
shown Tibet as a separate country, and is this India's policy? And how can you show it as a separate country? So I
Hmm.
had to kind of, take out 20 minutes and, well, explain to her that this was not a political statement. This was a cultural statement. So this is a Tibetan Ramayana in the cultural sense and
Hmm.
not in the political sense.
Hmm.
Honestly, my personal predilection was
I can
not
imagine.
to, but then
But you didn't
I
want to
did
create a diplomatic incident, did you?
incident. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. I did not
Yeah.
want to create a diplomatic incident and, unpleasantness. And the Chinese escalate this very quickly.
Hmm.
So they are very, very sentimental and very sensitive about this. I don't
Hmm.
know how this is going to be sorted out, Utkarsh. India is no longer so weak that it will be bullied by China. China is not so weak that it can be overtaken by anything that India says. So we are at a stalemate.
Yes, I could say you could say so, but I think there are certain macro trends which could resolve this.
Really? As in?
Yes. I don't know. I don't want to say it on YouTube. I want to keep it because, the CCP is very, very sensitive.
Okay,
So
all right.
let's just say that.
Okay, let's wait and see how things go. We
Yes.
also want to talk about India-Tibet cultural links, right? So
Yes.
I have mentioned some things,
Hmm.
but there's one place, like I said, I want to mention especially, and that is Dunhuang. So the caves at Dunhuang. Dunhuang is was in Tibet. And at its greatest extent, Tibet controlled
Hmm.
Dunhuang also. So
Hmm.
we have shown actually the Dunhuang caves, and we have told you the story of how the cache of documents was found. For learning about India, Tibet, China relations, and also Mongolia, the cache of
Hmm.
papers found is very, very helpful. It provides a really rich account. And
Hmm. Hmm.
I really want it to be analyzed by people who are not Chinese. Because otherwise, what they try to do is put Dunhuang on the Silk Road and say that it was part of that whole Chinese Silk Road thing and make the
Hmm.
focus China. So,
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
are the Chinese documents? What is the Chinese aspect? Although there's somebody from the British Library who analyzed one document which had two other documents pasted on it. So, it was a pass asked for by a Chinese from the Tibetans to go to India.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, you see that the Chinese wanted the wisdom of India. They asked permission from the Tibetans. And the languages used over there are so many different languages which are used in India, Central Asia, and China. And
Hmm. Hmm.
very cutely, Tibetan is, sorry, Sanskrit is written on it in Tibetan characters. So it just tells you of the soft power of India, which we really need to dig out and, show to the world.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think, that's the reason why so many of these Western powers are very afraid of Indic soft power, of Indic power and Indic soft power, because once you dig it out, it's just going to be like an ocean.
Hmm.
So,
Yep.
Utkarsh, I also want to do a special episode on what are the important documents and things that we gather from Dunhuang. So let's flag
Hmm.
it as one of our future episodes. Flagged.
Done.
So I don't know, did you find this whole history interesting? For me, it was fascinating.
It was. I think I have a few takeaways. One is the distinct identity and rich history of Tibet.
Yes.
And I think uh, it is important that it is not forgotten. It is important that that particular country has allies, right? Because it's been a very tough, whatever, 74 years, right? So that's one
Mm.
important thing. So it's good. It's good because it's kind of by extension a part of Indic civilization. It's a different country.
Yes.
It's an extension of
Yes.
Indic civilization.
Yes.
So it
Very
is part
much.
of the remit. It is part of the remit of what we talk about
Mm.
with Indic
Absolutely.
history. Yeah. And the
And
second
it's
one,
so
yeah,
sad that we don't think about it. And you were the one who suggested this topic, I think, and it was very timely, this suggestion.
yeah. And the second thing is, as you know, as we keep talking, and this is beyond this podcast remit, but in general, we are at a particular time where the unipolarity of the world is kind of being challenged with China. India is not challenging anything, but India is emerging, and so on and so forth. So I think having the true story of Tibet is an important bit of factual information for people, whether they're from India, whether
Yes.
they're from the West, or whether it is folks from China itself who are open to know what is real and what is propaganda. It's
So,
important to have the
Utkarsh, if
story
I
out
could
there.
just interject here, aren't there many Chinese in Singapore?
70, but Chinese in Singapore are Singaporean. They're of Chinese ethnicity. Some of them speak
Okay.
Chinese, but
Okay.
they don't identify as Chinese from China.
Okay. So they are
It's a
not all
distinct
that
identity.
interested. Okay. So they are not all that interested in Chinese history. They don't think of it as their history.
Yes, it's part of who they are, but it's not the biggest part of who they are.
Okay. Which it doesn't
So that's
leave me
how it is.
much wiser, Utkarsh, but okay.
No, let me put it this way. It's like, okay, very bad parallel, very, very bad parallel. But say in the US, I am from, my parents are from, I'm Irish or I am Italian American. Italy is a
Hmm.
part of who I am, but it's not really,
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense. That makes
I'm
sense.
American
Like
first, but
like
I'm,
Indian Americans, like Indian
yeah,
Americans, or
yeah,
like Indian Singaporeans.
yes, Indian Singaporeans as well to an extent.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so should we leave it here?
I think so. I think so. It's been a very interesting journey for me.
Hmm.
I hope for people who have been listening also. Utkarsh, I hope it wasn't too complicated. It is really complicated. I tried to simplify it, but it is. 2000 years or more of very complex interaction,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
not very easy to make it very simple.
Hmm. No, for sure, for sure. I think it was complicated, but I think it is digestible, and I think more than one listen would help to fully, place all the events in history in sequence. But I think the main message of it, or the main strokes of it, was very, very easy to understand.
Yeah, Tibet is, I mean, it was an independent country with a very strong and rich identity. And it has been
Hmm.
invaded and run over by China. I think that's
Hmm.
what I wanted to say. And the second part being that it is our Indic brother or sister, whichever you like.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right. See you next time.
Yes, be with us. And next time, do let us talk about how we've reached 20,000.
Yes.
Like, subscribe, share.
And share.
Yeah.
Okay.
Namaste.